So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to what I believe is a complete Dwarven civil war, which seems to have been a bit of a theme of late. It is also going to be on a map which was ubiquitous really in the last patch of the game, which is a de facto cityscape once again, albeit this one, which I think technically speaking is meant to be in the Belfalas somewhere, but a Dwarven civil war, it makes more sense for it to be somewhere in the north, perhaps around the ice bay of FOROCHEL, seeing as it's on the coast. But under normal circumstances we saw this part of the map seldom used because it was where the attackers tended to march from, but this time around it's going to be where the defenders are actually going to be posted up and the four attackers are going to be on the other side of the map. Now it does say Mirkwood and the like, but this is the way that they've managed to get around being able to do mirror matchups. The game thinks it's Dol Guldur and Mirkwood and etc, but in reality it is just more Dwarven factions. So that is how they have managed to work their magic in terms of the coding this time around. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I mean, the battle is going to be pretty much entirely clustered around this section over here, with the defence being laid out in really with the dwarves on the defence overwatching this area over here and maybe trying to block one of the attacking armies coming around this direction as well. So it's not going to be the most complicated fight by any means, but it is going to be a very violent one, considering the dwarves, I mean, usually they can bank on having superior infantry to their opposition, but here it is the same infantry. Not only that, but dwarves against dwarves, they have plenty of armour piercing in their rosters, so the primary strength is denied by themselves really. It's a rather interesting kind of situation. But we'll go through the attackers first and foremost, starting off with Dabo here, who's the one who sent me this battle replay. This battle was run twice, and this was apparently the better version of it, so this is the one we shall be using. Erebor sit kind of in the middle of the two Dwarven factions in terms of what their focus is, in terms of straight up infantry power, which of course all the dwarves do have, but they have it to varying levels, and then ranged support in order to back up that very hefty front line they have. Erebor sit in the middle really, with their ranged support being very, very deadly, but not necessarily having any sort of ranged advantage over many factions in the game at all, with their infantry sat in the middle really in terms of how powerful it is, Khazad-Dum being slightly more so, Ered Luin being slightly less so, but of course Ered Luin with more ranged punch generally speaking. Upgraded Ironfoot warriors, and they are on the attack here, the blue team, so they are going to need to rely on cost effectiveness just that little bit more. Like I said, the armour upgrade may not actually be all that useful given the fact that the dwarves do have a tendency to be able to field a lot of their own armour piercing. But it's better to have it than not, even if that is the case, of course. So if you do have the money to spend, you may as well do so. Erebor Legionaries, of course, are the stronger unit of line infantry. It'll be interesting to see how much of the Dwarven range is mitigated by the very high armour values and shield values that these kind of units tend to have. Like I said, it's rather an interesting situation we have here in these mirror matchups, because there isn't really a key advantage that the dwarves can lay down. Like I said, usually they can rely on, against most factions, having some sort of edge in terms of their infantry, but here of course very much an even playing field. Catapult, if they can position it correctly, artillery could be the sort of thing to decide this battle in all fairness. The Dwarven catapult crew as well, decent infantrymen in their own right, wielding those little mallets and also coming equipped with shields as well. But of course, as we've seen in the past, artillery can be so important to any side, attacker or defender's chances of winning a battle. Several units of Ironfoot pikes as well. This sort of anchor is going to be very, very important to anyone's chances of winning. Also, those shields will help against the range pressure that in particular the archers of Khazad-Dum and Ered Luin can put Erebor under. Lots of pikes as well, so very much going for that big anchor is Dabo. And here we have the ranged core of Erebor, and lots of Ironfoot axe throwers and Ironfoot crossbows, obviously lots of punch, lots of high damage. The crossbows of course have got that armour piercing, which is going to be very important in this sort of situation, though they do need a good line of sight. The axe throwers, that's a little bit less of a concern for them because they can throw their projectiles over units, but they do have to get far closer of course, which puts them in immediate harm's way of getting closed down in melee. And then a new unit for Erebor, the Dragon Slayers Trackers, which is another high tier axe unit. Included in the deal as well is a big two-handed battle axe as well. They do still have the regular Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin as well as the out-and-out melee infantry unit at high end, but this gives them maybe a little bit more of a utility bodyguard pick, and obviously being dwarves they're still going to be very, very potent in melee as well. Very interested to see how they get on here against high tier opposition in their brethren. TS Niehoff is playing as the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains, like I said, more of a ranged focus on their faction as a whole. The Frost Spears we've seen be very effective in the past. Again, line of sight is fairly important for them with their repeaters, so we'll see if they can get into a position being on the attack that they can use their projectiles really effectively. And the dwarves, fellow dwarves, will be able to take more of a beating from them than most factions as well, but ultimately the speed at which their projectiles get released is going to be a little bit of a concern perhaps for anyone. Marksman of Thorin's Halls, obviously very good in a skirmish fight, and this is one area where the Blue Mountains really can lay down a marker against their fellow short folk, but again, the dwarves generally though, across their whole roster, are going to be pretty good at dealing with these archers that do their damage in more of a slow burn kind of fashion. But it is one of the ways in which Ered Luin can establish themselves, depending on how fast and furious the battle's pace tends to be. Wardens of Thorin's Halls, another example perhaps of Ered Luin trading in a little bit of the survivability of their brethren for something else, and in this case it's a little bit more melee defense, maybe a little bit more of an aggressive edge with a dual-wielding axe. They do still have a shield value, though wearing it on their back does curtail it quite a bit, and this is obviously the upper end unit of effectively line infantry that the Blue Mountains have. So yes, we have the war boars of the Blue Mountains. I mean, this is a map with some more wide open spaces, so there is the potential here for this unit of cavalry to be effective, but if the defenders do just post up in that corner, I really doubt that they're going to be able to utilise them in a truly effective manner. I think this is the first time we've seen actually the Ered Luin cavalry ever since their debut. We have the Juggernauts. I don't know if this is their final name or not, but at least they're no longer the unlocalised placement text. Obviously the high-end unit of infantry that Ered Luin have. Kind of similar to the Obsidian Guard, though again maybe a little bit more aggressive considering they wield axes rather than short swords. Guardians of the Blue Mountains as well, javelins, throwing projectiles are something every dwarven faction has, albeit I do think Ered Luin have access to the most with a basic version, this slightly higher end variant, and then obviously they have the bodyguard tier version as well, which we shall see if they have them. Durin's Warborn are the bodyguard tier cavalry as well that they have available to them, not too dissimilar to the Iron for Hammer Guard, though with a little bit more defensive prowess but less aggressive edge to them. Or warboars as well, which is an interesting decision to bring this much cavalry given the nature of the battle. I mean, if it's dwarf v dwarf, you kind of know what the battle's going to end up being shaped like. And the Warriors of the Blue Mountains are the basic unit, much like the Ironfoots are for Erebor, as we have already seen. Moving on, we have Khazad-Dum, played by Hidden, and he has got some Meteor Guard. Still, I think, if you were to put among the regular bodyguard infantry, if you discount stuff like the Nazgul on an individual basis, then the Meteor Guard are still the tankiest unit overall of infantry that the game has to offer, with that third hit point and the extremely high armour that they of course have. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, not too dissimilar actually to the Dragon Slayer's Trackers that we've seen, although the Dragon Slayer's Trackers bodyguard variant of them. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, though, very similar in terms of the fact they will be a very high-end throwing axe unit with that two-handed axe in melee. Mercenary crossbows can be used as regular crossbows in a siege battle like this if they don't need to hunt down cavalry, which is a very good use actually against fellow dwarves, considering all of their cavalry tends to be much more up front. So if you are prepared to kite, merc crossbows can be very useful for that, but they're also very fragile. Enemy archers will make quick work of them. Several units of 3rd Legion, upper end units of dwarves, obviously the Legion units, really the backbone of Khazad-Dum. They offer a little bit more than their fellow dwarves at this tier, especially when you upgrade the armour here, like these 4th Legion have. We've got the Sentries of Khazad-Dum, very similar to the Ironfoots, albeit the Ironfoots do have slightly better armour and also that shield, so overall they're a little bit better, but Khazad-Dum have got other options at the high end, of course. Standard mercenary cavalry with those maces, so wanting to dominate the horseback battle here, the attackers, give themselves map control. I mean, I don't think they had to worry about that anyway, but if that was ever in doubt, it won't be now. Sons of the Fallen for some high tier spears, and then some Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum as well. And finally for the attackers, we have another Erebor army under the command of Her Tumihai. You can see here the Dragon Slayers, the standard Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, making an appearance here as well. I think that is actually Gimli as well as the general unit. We have the Dragon Slayer's Trackers once again, so another opportunity to see what they're all about. Several units of Erebor Legionaries to form the core of Her Tumihai's army. several units of Ironfoot pikes as well, and I think the fact that they are now shielded, it does give Erebor the incentive to bring lots of pikes, I think, because having a shield does help with the main weakness that pikes tend to have, especially when you back it up with that dwarven armour, which even at the basic Ironfoot level is still going to be very, very good. The cost effectiveness proposition for the Ironfoot pikes is now very good, I think. It does make Erebor maybe a little bit more planted in terms of what they do, however, and considering they don't have a lot of long range, it's not like they can just sit there and do pike and shot as such. But we'll see. That's never going to be a concern really in a siege battle where it isn't in doubt who's going to be moving forwards first. Several units of Ironfoot warriors once again with the armour upgrades, and then Ironfoot axe throwers also. Interestingly, I think he has omitted crossbows by the looks of things, instead going for just 3 units of axe throwers. I mean, maybe foreseeing the fact that the line of sight isn't going to be quite so good for them. We'll see. For the defenders, the Ered Luin army on the defence is going to be Y2K. Once again, Durin's Warborn. We'll see how well they can get on. Like I said, I don't know necessarily if it would be worth, certainly not worth it for the defenders, I think, to sally forth with cavalry in this sort of situation, but maybe I'm wrong. Stone hewers, of course, armour piercing, as we said, going to be very important. I think especially for the defenders, they're going to need that armour piercing damage to really do some heavy lifting, and the stone hewers are the basic but still good option the Ered Luin have for that. Once again, Warns of Thorin's Halls offering a little bit more aggression for that kind of unit, and the Juggernauts once again, big battle for them to prove what they can do. Marksmen of Thorin's Halls and Warboars once again, marksman positioning and rationing their ammunition going to be key. Guardians of the Blue Mountains once again, more javelins. The Frost Spears should be easier to use for the defenders, and we've seen how effective they can be in the past in terms of sheer kill counts. Like I said, against fellow dwarves that might not be as high, but you're still hoping for a good kill count for the defenders. The Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls, again, Spear Malice, and without armour piercing, going to be difficult for them to get a really high kill count, but they will be the shield. Other units will have to be the sword. And then Defenders of the Blue Mountains as well, the basic variant of the spears. Moving on to, listed as Mirkwood, but it is going to be Erebor, played by Filler. The Iron Ballista. Now this is another unit which I'm going to be interested to see, because it's another unique artillery piece, how it stacks up to the likes of the Dragon's Breath and the Isengard Ballista. We are seeing more unique artillery in the game now, even to slightly lesser extents like the Trebuchet of Numenor with its unique crew for the Numenorian factions, but this of course is a completely unique artillery piece. We shall see how well it can get on here. Obviously artillery is always going to be very important, potentially good for sniping out that attacking catapult as well. Several units of unupgraded Ironfoot warriors, which is interesting. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard, which in terms of one-on-one mounted to mounted combat should probably be the very best the dwarves have to offer. That armor piercing in melee should make the difference against something like the Durin's Warborn. Several units of Ironfoot axe throwers, again, defensive position going to be very advantageous for them, especially for the Ironfoot crossbows though, and the Blacklock Engineers. Huge amount of punch here at close range for Erebor with the Dragon Slayer's trackers, and then all of the crossbows of course as well. Up front punch as well with the Sons of Durin. Obviously that's a lot of arm piercing. No longer a bodyguard tier unit, but 4 bodyguard tier units apiece for the dwarves was always a little bit overkill anyway, and I think this actually makes the Sons of Durin more usable as an aggressive unit as they should be. Several units of Ironfoot pikes once again, so clearly this is what people are settling on as the core of any Erebor army. Bring as many Ironfoot pikes as you can and make that your backbone, and then some Dwarven miners just to help pad the numbers. And finally, we'll get on to the Khazad-Dum army for the defenders, led by Tommy, the upgraded 3rd Legion Infantry, of course, now with 2 levels of armour upgrade. The Legion Bodyguard are the bodyguard casualty for Khazad-Dum in this version of the game, but their unit model lives on in another armour upgrade for the 3rd Legion, this time with the 3 painted on their shields. Several units of them. I mean, this should be a very effective frontline. Like I said, the Legion units offer that little bit of an edge at this tier in comparison to the other dwarves, and when you upgrade their armour to this extent, yes, armour piercing is not in short supply for the dwarves, but should still be an effective force. Upgraded 2nd Legion as well, like I said, more armour piercing. And of course the mercenary crossbows, though like I said, I think more of a defensive stance for these guys, because I really don't think that the cavalry is going to be able to break out for the red team in this sort of situation. I think that maybe in looking at the red team bringing this amount of cavalry, it's actually been wise for the blue team to do the same, because I still think they will be able to wrest control of that particular aspect of the battle. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers are here also. And then up on the hilltop, Orc Hunters already in position. As far as archers go, they are going to be a little bit lacking in comparison to the Ered Luin archers, but position is something that they have certainly in their favour. Hammers of Gundabad with their armour piercing, more Mithril Guard, of course, the First Legion pikes, arguably the single strongest unit of pikes the game has to offer still. And then some Sons of the Fallen to help that would build a really, really solid front line indeed. Now, I'll make a cut. I think it's almost inevitable in this kind of battle, and I support a grace period in this situation, because you do need to allow the dwarves to get back into place, but hopefully it doesn't last for too long. But I imagine once things get going, it's actually going to be a fairly violent and fairly swift affair, just because the dwarves are very solid, but they also have the weapons to undo themselves. Let's see, is it going to be a more numbers-heavy dwarven force, or is it going to be the more stalwart defenders, as we often see the dwarves be, that actually wins this civil war? I'll rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So we shall rejoin here with only one unit of stragglers still not in behind the defensive line. This one unit of frost spears as the defenders gather up around this choke point that they will be basing most of their defence around anyway. Orc Hunters in a very good position, and also the Iron Ballista as well, which of course I am very eager to see in action. It's always interesting when you see sort of these showpiece units for the first time. Marksmen of Thorin's Halls moving forward, understandably they are the best when it comes to opening up maybe a longer engagement, though like I said, based on the amount of frames that this battle is, and based on the factions that are involved, I imagine that there may very well be a skirmishing phase at the start, but I don't think it's going to last too long. I think that the attackers will be testing the defenders a little bit more rigorously fairly fast. Interesting as well that not all of Dabo's army is going to be going around the side route, which I find kind of surprising. I feel like having the entirety of an army trying to go a different route would probably be better than sending more support to go up front, because this means of course the defenders can simply bulk up on their front line just a little bit more. I put pikes in behind a fairly varied front line, the fully upgraded 3rd Legion. Also, one of the points of defence. Again, all this cavalry. Cavalry has not really been utilised at this point, so that means the open field advantage cavalry may offer is not going to be on the table, but it will be interesting to see if later on, when one side or the other starts to falter, if the cavalry can then turn the battle around or simply drive the final nail into the coffin of whoever is already struggling. Still a little bit of shuffling around going on here from the attackers back here, but it's mostly just Khazad-Dum units slowly trundling their way into position. Once again, we appear to be in a situation where the battle is taking a bit too long to get going again. I seem to have prematurely rejoined, but oh well. Again, it's a solid enough defence. I suppose it's for the sake of the battle being more interesting as well that they're not simply clogging up this choke point over here with tons and tons of units. It does give them a little bit more room maybe as well to pick and choose their targets, stuff like the Blacklock Engineers. Will be a pretty nasty one. We'll have to try and overcome. Mercenary crossbows as well should be pretty useful on the defence, but they would be surely the first ports of call for those attacking archers. There's not too many archers within the not too many defending units that are too vulnerable to archers. Guardians of the Blue Mountains as well, offering some javelin support. And that is a fair point. You need to be a little bit careful they don't get too close so that the cavalry can then simply charge them from the front. And slowly but surely, hopefully surely anyway, are they really going to wait for this army to slowly waddle its way around the corner? I hope not. The Hammer Guard is dangerous, but I mean, surely they can get it. Surely they're in a position to start shooting at something valuable now. Perhaps. We can only hope. They're hiding. I wonder what terrain is over here that causes units to hide. Scrub. Strange. Khazad-Dum slowly march into place as well. Ironfoot units in behind. There's no getting around the fact that the attackers are going to be put into a really compromising position in the face of the ballista up there, but interestingly enough, I think if they do opt for some really hefty aggression, if they try and get to the base of the cliff as quickly as possible, it may mitigate the effectiveness of said unit. Ah, finally. Better late than never. And it is going to be the Ironfoot pikes that they go after first and foremost. Well, no, actually, I think it's the 2nd Legion Axe Guard they're actually going after, which I was going to say, because the Ironfoot pikes with those shields, it's actually less effective to go after them with standard archers. A few of the axe throwers, and actually a few of the mercenary crossbowmen being hit as well, but not a ton of damage being done there. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard thinking about moving forwards, but yeah, I mean, it was never really going to be ideal for them. Javelins. Mercenary crossbows, what are they fighting? Strange. Anyway, mercenary cavalry chasing the defending cavalry away. Still just very minor amounts of damage from the archers thus far. Then 2nd Legion Axe Guard still reorganising themselves. I mean, they've got to be careful they don't retreat too far, of course, because eventually the attack will come, but they don't really have anything that they can respond with down here. It's this initial defence which is too far away from the supporting archers up on the cliff, which may prove to be a little bit concerning over the long haul for the defenders, unless they're willing to bring one of the units of archers down here. But even then, they wouldn't win that skirmishing fight with Orc Hunters. So either way, it's a win-win for the attackers. It's going to take Dabo an awfully long time to get in position if he insists on moving this slowly. I'm also wondering why these units went up here like that. Surely they didn't expect to be on the defence today, the Blues. It is what it is. Still, slowly softening the enemy up. Isn't really any other units putting any significant pressure on the defenders. Someone's halls. There's not really much to say about this battle so far. There are a few more units of archers now also pitching in, the Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum. Slowly this will start to have an impact on these units down here, and then with an all-out assault the defenders may start to feel the strain a little bit more, but that is of course where their own projectiles can come in if they're already in a pretty scary looking place. Second Legion still the primary target. And here, still moving at a crawl, though that is just how the dwarves tend to do things, but I mean, based on how long this battle is, I assume that once the dwarves get over there they will just attack straight up, as opposed to continuing in this vein. And now the archers falling silent, mostly. No, the archers falling silent completely, so we're now back to a complete void of anything happening.
will the attackers choose to truly begin this battle? And I mean, amazingly, we're almost halfway through the frames that are in the battle, and so far we've only had a bit of minor skirmishing. So I can only assume that once the attack gets underway, this battle will kick itself into life. In a big way. Warriors of the Blue Mountains slowly creeping their way forwards. This looks a little bit more promising. Plenty of infantry on the way forwards now. And the amount of damage done to the defenders is not huge, but every little does help. Crossbows will be preparing themselves to fire as well. The Black Clocks up on the hill, the Ballista, all of these the defenders will be relying upon. And then numbers, of course, will be in heavy favour of the attackers. Foot pikes solidifying themselves on the front line. I mean, now we're seeing the marksmen of Thorin's Halls start firing once again, but it's not actually really going to make too much of a difference where those pikes actually were positioned. The shields will still be coming into effect after all. We will be seeing the first melee engagement in the battle. Do actually have the Mirkwood voice lines, which is kind of amusing. So we're going to be hearing elven war shouts from the defenders today. Warriors of the Blue Mountains will be the first ones in. Again, especially with the armour upgrade, you would give the edge 1-to-1 to the Ironfoot Warriors over the Warriors of the Blue Mountains. Throwing axes. Also coming in, Ironfoot Pikes. 4th Legion Shield Guard leading the way over here, going up against their fellow Legion. Albeit the 3rd Legion have a little bit of an edge, of course. 3rd Legion Infantry with no levels of armour upgrades coming in support of them. This is a little bit of a concern. Managing to find a gap. 4th Legion Shield Guard, of course, things may get a little confusing from a distance when the Legion units are facing off against one another, but we will know which is which. 4th Legion now going to be joined on the front line by some Ironfoot Pikes. And now all the attackers moving in. I mean, some of them are shaken, interestingly enough. Ironfoot Axe Throwers undoubtedly a big part of that. Warriors of the Blue Mountains shaken as well. The Ironfoot Pikes for both the attackers and the defenders will be keeping this front line ticking over for a moment though. Guardians of the Blue Mountains trying to use their javelins, but the Ironfoot Axe Throwers already situated and doing a lot of damage as well. Ironfoot Hammer Guard through their own line, and maybe now the attackers have cause to be concerned. I mean, the marksmen of Thorin's Halls can actually get in the way, and through their mass they can prevent the Hammer Guard from charging out into the open field, which, if that had happened, that would have been a real concern, because they could have charged into the back of these front lines, and any units which were still shaken would undoubtedly have routed as a result of that. Bit of cavalry action happening over here then. Ironfoot Warriors getting charged by the war boars of the Blue Mountains. Still Erebor's army looking a little bit stretched over here, that they're waiting for the support to come in so they can start an attack in earnest. It is almost a certainty for the Ironfoot Warriors. Third Legion struggling still against their fully upgraded counterparts. The support of the Pikes will also add a great deal. Pikes for the attackers will be one of the things getting targeted down, even with the shield value. You would suggest that shooting into these blobs, going after the Pikes, will be one of the more advantageous things for something like the Orc Hunters to be doing. Going after the mercenary crossbows though is actually another good choice. As we mentioned, many of the dwarves are very resilient to arrow fire. They do have crossbows and throwing axes and the like at their disposal, so with some of their lower damage projectiles, why not go after the more fragile options? Whereas the Blue Mountains, however, this area of the front line looking very thin on the ground now, so the defenders will need to plug the gap with something else. And they're getting hit by frost spears as well. They're going to send in a unit of out of ammunition axe throwers and hope that the range units can do the damage necessary to see them over the line. Victory is a distinct possibility. Fire arrows coming in as well. I don't know if the morale shocks are necessarily going to be able to do much here. Maybe when the units were shaken a little bit earlier it would have been a little bit more effective. Warboards were not the greatest charge in, and they won't want to charge in again now anyway with the Ironfoot pikes in close proximity. Still a lot of flaming projectiles coming in. More legionaries. Spear guard, I mean, what are they going to do here? It looks as though they're running out of manpower here on the front line. The dwarves could try and turn things around. A nice swift charge by the Ironfoot hammer guard. Not the most devastating charge that we've ever seen. Still the repeaters of the frost spears doing the business. Ironfoot warriors moving in. Marksman of Thorin's Halls as well, still utilising those defensive flaming arrows, but again with those Sons of Durin also on the front line as well. That's all well and good, but the rest of the front line does seem to be falling. Erebor legionaries' defeat seems certain. Sons of Durin doing a good job at blocking the way for the time being. The Spearguard of Thorin's Hall struggling a little bit more. As Erebor legionaries continue to bludgeon their way through. This is an interesting choice. Merc crossbows, I assume they must be out of ammunition, otherwise surely they wouldn't be being used to try and bludgeon their way through a unit of still healthy Khazad-Dum reclaimers. Rather confusingly we see Khazad-Dum reclaimer against Khazad-Dum reclaimer. Axe to axe. Backed up, however, the attackers are with their own legion units still. Yeah, this front line is now going to fall away, surely. It's just whether or not the defenders can set up another good defensive position. Ironfoot warriors here getting charged as well. Maybe Phil are not able to retreat these Ironfoots quickly enough. Axe throwers also trying to get away, but the attackers will be hoping to try and cut them off in doing so. Meanwhile, Ironfoot warriors trying to tackle the initial defence Ered Luin have laid on for them up here. Spear guard of Thorin's Halls. Stone hewers, that'll be key with that armour piercing. There's also the defenders of the Blue Mountains as well, the basic spears. Very spear heavy defensive line this though. With a few more aggressive units, Dabo could start to make some real progress. Frost spears though are in a very, very good position. And that's going to be very consistent, very quick damage being done. So they're going to need to try and blunder their way through this front line over here. Erebor hoping to keep them contained for as long as possible. Meanwhile, defensive line starting to be set. This unit of Ironfoot axe throwers and warriors, I don't know if it's intentional, they're being kept behind as a rear guard, but they're having their heels nipped at by the Erebor legions that Hurtumahai has been sending forward in their aggressive stance. Still a lot of units a little bit further back. It did cost the attackers going through that area though. Blacklock engineers will have a good angle here. They may actually get a lot of friendly fire though, is also the problem, based on their own units being just in behind. And the battle has begun already for the hill. Sons of the Fallen will always beat Iron for axe throwers, of course, but what will the attackers do? The miners also making up a portion of this front line. I'm going to assume these axe throwers are out of ammunition, otherwise they probably wouldn't be the first ones committed. Blacklocks. Khazad-Dum as well, of course, with their locked morale, that may yet come into effect. May yet be an important aspect of this battle. Oh, Erebor getting on over here. A lot of dead units from Erebor there, some stone hewers filtering their way through the lines. Erebor slowly but surely are managing to overcome this Ered Luin front line. They are taking a lot of damage, of course, from those ranged units. The Durin's Warborn here also. Swift downhill charge, but I mean the Ironfoot pikes are here, so you need to be very, very careful about taking such actions. Will the cavalry prove to be worthwhile in such moments? Legion doing their thing. Dwarven catapult's still pretty far away. One thing I noticed we haven't really seen so far is the Dwarven ballista, although perhaps now we will. More units starting to filter their way towards the front now. Ironfoot warriors clashing with the defending Sons of the Fallen. Ironfoot axe throwers in a good position here as well for the attackers, some that still have some ammunition. Clattering into those Khazad-Dum reclaimers and a lot of damage being done there. Merc crossbows, I mean, yeah, I was going to say they need to start using some of their heavy hitting range support here. Defenders, mercenary crossbowmen, and Ironfoot crossbows among them. Khazad-Dum reclaimers trying to take cover. Wardens of Thorin's Halls on the way forwards as well, those dual wielders. Yeah, not armour piercing, which would be the most important thing, but in these sustained melee engagements, that should help them. There we go. The first hit from the iron ballista. That's going to be a concern, of course. We haven't seen any mass routing yet, but if one thing can engender mass routing, it would be artillery like this. Throwing axes trying to go after the artillery crew. It's one way to paint a target on your head. Ironfoot warriors. Ooh, dear oh dear. That is a nice angle that they've managed to find. Big damage. And routing becomes ever more a possibility. Victory seems certain. Orc hunters still providing overwatch, but I mean, they are also going through the back of their own men by doing this. That was a lot of their own Sons of the Fallen which just fell, but also a healthy amount of the enemies as well. And taking these kind of risks is kind of necessary at this point. But you can see that the attackers, that will light a fire under them and make them try and push through these defensive positions. Mithril Guard trying to plug the line. Ironfoot crossbows are going to get in the way actually of the Iron Ballista if they're not careful. Dragon Slayers, trackers. They were going to throw their throwing axes. They elect not to now. Cross spears reloading. Attacking cavalry trying to move in. The Juggernauts are also here. What's the fate of this front line over here? Juggernauts fighting on the front line here also. Fighting Erebor to a bit of a standstill, but the Ironfoot crossbows in support over there, Guardians of the Blue Mountains in support for the defenders, so both sides will be continuing to take a fair amount of damage. Dragon Slayers, trackers and the Durin's Warborn messing around with one another back there. So overall it's a bit of a dead rubber, this fight over here. I think maybe you could argue a slight... no, I wouldn't even say that. I think it's very, very even between what's happened between the attackers and the defenders there. So it's all going to come down, I think, to the frontal engagement. Wardens of Thorin's Halls for the defenders also. Sons of the Fallen have definitely proven themselves to be a very solid bulwark on the front line, as you would expect. It's really their calling in life. Still a lot of projectiles being utilised here. This may be the difference here. I mean, it is often quite hard to keep track of how much damage the ranged support is actually doing. All of these crossbows and ballista bolts, they could yet prove to be too much for the attackers to deal with. Attacking Juggernauts, trying to make their way forwards, but 1st Legion pikes standing in their way as well. They've been doing their best to try and move in and collapse the defensive line, and then their support wouldn't be quite as scary. Oh, this is interesting. So they're wielding their axe like a spear? That's what that animation style is. Does that mean they counter spears there? Or is it just the animation that they're using? The animation is what makes the spears so good defensively because of the speed of their attacks. Juggernauts, meanwhile, no doubting what they're all about, but stuck on the end of those pikes and taking hits from afar as well. They are one of the scarier units the attackers have to offer, so unsurprising that ranged units are going after them. There's cavalry in behind enemy lines as well. I think this is Warboars of the Blue Mountains making a nuisance of themselves, trying to do what they can, clattering into the Orc Hunters of Khazad-Dum as well. Iron Ballista. Slayers also on the front line now as well, the standard variant of them. They do have armour piercing as well. That will be the sort of thing to make the Sons of the Fallen sweat a little bit. Still the defending Dragon Slayers trackers loitering around as well. Mithril Guard versus Mithril Guard. The attacking Mithril Guard actually struggling a little bit more so at the moment. Defensive choke proving to be difficult to get through. Marksman of Thorin's Halls going off against the Orc Hunters. It's very interesting actually, this battle for the most part is seen either by accident or by design. The equivalent units from both sides facing off against one another, out of ammo archers taking one another on both sides. Mithril Guard doing it. Legion units galore. Durin's Warborn finishing up over here, leaving these final units for the Guardians of the Blue Mountains. The catapult has moved forward. I mean, that's one thing I would say. I haven't really seen the catapult. I think it's been dawdling far too much. That should have been used way earlier. Dragon Slayers, trackers from Dabo will deal with the Guardians of the Blue Mountains. I mean, maybe the catapult can still be the primary difference maker if Erebor can be victorious over here. A general falls. Whose general was that? Was it Y2K's? It could have been TS Nihoff's actually, with the Luin's Warborn there. Either way, that's the first general to fall. Frost Spears doing their thing. Do the attackers just have a little bit too much left in terms of numbers? The attackers started off on the low ground pretty well, winning that fight. They've taken an awful lot of punishment to get to this point, but will that all be in vain for the defenders come the battle's conclusion? You know, Ironfoot Pikes marching in column formation through a gap in the line, and that's worrisome for the defenders. As soon as the line starts to fall apart like this, and gaps are found and exploited by the attackers, recovery can be an issue. First Legion Pikes trying to reshuffle themselves, Marksman of Thorin's Halls moving around here to try and help crunch in on these Mithril Guard, which, to be fair, the defenders are still doing quite well over in this portion of the line. It's only in the middle where they've started to truly falter. Ironfoot Pikes lurching forward into the Ballista crew, although based on the fact that the Ballista had to abandon its post by the looks of things. Dragon Slayers, Trackers, and Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin getting in amongst the Frost Spears, and this is the sort of thing that makes you think the attackers are onto a winner here. Worrying times. Victory seems certain. Ironfoot Pikes at the front line as well. They may be still doing quite well over on that flank, but I think that's the only part of the battlefield now where the defenders are still looking like they will be successful. Over here, again, it's just a matter of having some individual units of very high quality. Stonehewers still way back there. I mean, it's only really the Dragon Slayers Trackers that remain. There is the catapult as well, but how useful the catapult's actually going to be at this point, I don't know. Really is clean up at this point. I mean, it's also at this point now where the front line is almost completely collapsed, where you have to really focus just in order to see where the front lines still are. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Erebor Legionaries. Ironfoot Pikes as well. First Legion. Again, as a response unit, the Pikes are really good when you've got everything under control, but if you're having to peel them off a front line so they can intercept a flank, that's where Pikes, even Pikes as lofty as the First Legion, are going to struggle just a little bit. But it is what it is. Attacking cavalry as well. Running around all over the place, Marksman of Thorin's Halls on the way across. What very little the Blue Mountains can spare from their fight with Erebor. And even that's not going to be enough. Still, this little pocket of resistance is doing very well for itself. The Wardens alongside the mighty Mithril Guard fighting hard, but there goes, I think that must have been the attacking Khazad-Dum general. Mithril Guard, perhaps. Ironfoot Pikes roaming. Merc Crossbows still doing their thing. Still some movement as well. Trying to finally finish off some of the defending locations here. Dragon Slayer's Trackers completely surrounded by Ironfoot Pikes, and now their opposite numbers are also going to be coming over to try and help finish them off. There goes the other Blue Mountains generals. Both players now losing them. Yeah. Just about within the 10%. And in the end, I think the initial engagement was where the stage was set for how this battle has gone. More on that in the endgame splash screen. Mercenary crossbows peeling off. Mercenary crossbows look like they're firing their projectiles straight upwards. Dangerous thing to be doing. Victory seems certain as well over here. Now, Marksman of Thorin's Hall's shaken. No general left to them after all. 7 Mithril Guard remain. And that will surely be the end of proceedings, one way or another. Again, pretty much the entirety of the attacking Dwarven army is over here as well. So it's not a ton. Then again, proportionally speaking, of course, the Dwarves are always going to bring smaller armies than the vast majority of factions in the game. Mithril Guard will fight to the bitter end, being dealt with in melee as they are by the Frost Spears, however. They use the Phalanx animation as well, which is interesting. I don't think they have the range of any Phalanx unit, but still. That crossbow's also trying to take a few more pot shots by the looks of things. There you can see Tommy's general. Because it says he's Mirkwood, it's an elf, albeit with Blue Mountains colours. And there we have it. It's a bit of a slow start, but as expected, once it got going, it was all about the aggression and the high quality infantry that both sides possess. And I think the reason why the attackers won this was, again, that initial engagement did go their way. I think initially there was a little bit of morale problems, but that's always going to happen if your units are a little bit stretched from one another when they advance in and the defenders have got that overwatch going on. But eventually that initial defensive position just wasn't solid enough for the defenders to really inflict enough casualties to make it worthwhile. And as a result, the lead that the attackers were able to build up was too much to surmount, which, you know, the defenders gave it a good go and the Iron Ballista did quite well. It's hard to tell how well stuff like the crossbows were able to do, but again, not quite enough for them to turn this battle around, but still. I mean, it was a very straightforward battle in many ways. The players couldn't really handle it in ways that were too different. I mean, really, for the defenders, it all comes down to how you build your line, where you build it, and just what you're shooting with your range support and how you position them. All of those factors together can make a difference, whereas for the attackers, it's about once you've committed to an assault like that, you just have to keep it going. You have to make sure that the momentum can carry you forwards, and in this case it was. Another part that plays into that, of course, is the defenders. When you're the dwarves, very often you can lean on your quality to be able to see you through in many situations. You can't do that here, though, because you're facing off against literally yourselves in a mirror match. So while you will have a little bit more quality per army because you're the defenders and you have a slight money advantage there, overall, in terms of individual quality of units and even type of units, you're not really going to have any sort of edge over your enemy, which is significant. That is a big deal in this sort of situation, because very often these high quality factions do rely on having that as an advantage, whereas in this case that was not to be. But yeah, I think the attackers were good value for their money here. So let's see what did the damage for the two Erebor armies. Dabo with 113 on his Dragon Slayer's trackers, one of the only units actually that survived his encounter with Y2K's Ered Luin army on the flank. Several units breaking 100, including Ironfoot Warriors. The Erebor Legionaries were a very good unit all round, I think, for everyone who utilised them. High quality infantry there. Indeed, from her Tumihai we see, yeah, the Erebor Legionaries once more. The two Dragon Slayers units up front were also pretty effective. They were committed when that secondary front line started to collapse as well. Again, some units of Ironfoot Warriors doing pretty well for themselves also. And I imagine it probably wasn't all that different for the defending Erebor army in Filler. We won't know, of course, but again, it is what it is. The Ironfoot Pike's not getting tons of damage, but you don't expect them to. They're there to secure your position, and the fact they're now shielded just makes them a little bit more effective at doing that. Tommy actually getting by far and away the most kills of any single player
on the field today. Don't know what units would be especially responsible for that. I mean, I suppose stuff like the Khazad-Dum reclaimers, mercenary crossbows perhaps as well, but also just the fact that he was most of the muscle up front with infantry, and that is what the dwarves are best at, I suppose. But still, it is a kind of stark difference. But again, the situation can be what it is there. Yeah, big thank you to Dabo for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players as well for running this battle twice and sending it in as well. As far as other news goes, I mean, I have been asked to point people in the direction of another Discord which is used to help set up battles, which I think, I don't actually have a link for that, weirdly enough, but at the beginning of the next battle I think I will mention that as well, and hopefully I will put the link to that down in the description of the next battle replay that comes out after this. I would urge people who are interested to get involved. That is one of the main ways in which battles are now being organised, this sort of secondary Discord, as the development continues on. Well, a lot of what is spoken about on the main Reforged Discord does appear to be tweaking with the patch for now. So in terms of setting up battles, this other Discord as well would be quite useful. And it is fair to say as well that, you know, more players are needed in order to run these battles, because I'd be lying if I said I wasn't slightly concerned about the fact that, you know, it's more difficult now to actually get battles running, and obviously I get less battles in as replays, and I'm pretty much constantly on the limit of my backlog, which never used to be the case. And a large part of that is down to the fragmentation of the player base due to all of the different versions of the test build coming out. Obviously, as I've said several times in the past, the game does really need the test build to come out in a timely fashion at this point, so hopefully that can happen. But in the interim, hopefully this group of players, which are essentially keeping the game afloat at this point, I think, and my channel afloat, can continue, and this Discord is definitely helping them to do that. So if anyone was interested in getting involved in these battles, I would definitely suggest checking that out. But yes, as I'm sure you can probably tell as well, my voice is a little bit croaky today, so I think I'm on the verge of losing it. So it's a good thing that this is the last battle replay that I'm going to be recording before going away on another work trip. This won't be quite as long as previous ones, though. I think I'll only be gone for 2 weeks at the very most. But yeah, either way, I should be back fairly quickly. But yeah, either way, hopefully by the time I get back as well, there will be a few more battle replays in the old backlog for me, and we can pick up where we left off, because yeah, we'll see. Anyway, big thanks to all the players, and Dabo especially once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.